So I'm going to just hand over to get things moving to Richard and Eleanor there, and your thoughts on this subject, Richard and Eleanor.
Yeah, good evening all. It is great for us to be sitting here by the fire here now and so healthy and well. Inoculation, I suppose years ago up to lately, I used to think the inoculation was some kind of secret ingredient that was kind of, manufactured or kind of put together in some secret lab. Like I heard Dan Kittredge then talking that one time, and Dan started off in the gardening side of things, like as a young boy, and used to spend a lot of his time weeding and stuff like that. Like, and he eventually came out to inoculate his seeds, and he explained that he would just go around his farm, and he would look out for healthy looking plants that was there with a sheen on their leaves. And he'd take a sample of soil from underneath those, and then he'd just put into water and mix and put out on his seeds. So I in 2020 then I decided I'd have a try this, so we had a spring crop of wheat that I said I'd spring wheat. So we went off the evening before, and I went into an oak wood. Was saying there's some kind of fungal activity in the wood, because you could see it on the stones and stuff, which is like mycelium. I mean, maybe it's not mycelium, but it looked healthy and it smelled fairly good. So I took some of that, and I went around then by the ditches and maybe picking up some plants around by the ditches, and then I tried a full of fear whether to be. I picked a little bit from there. I didn't really know what to do, but the only thing I was afraid of now was I was afraid to take any soil from underneath ferns now or something like that. And I thought maybe that might be great, but I brought it back then. Basically, I got a watering can, I put a small portion into a sock, and I left the first batch overnight for it to be, and then when I went to mix it on, put onto the seed, then I put the big bag of grain into a hopper and slowly left it kind of flow through into the big bag underneath. And I first had a small little knapsack, which is a waste of time really, because for a big bag. So I just got the watering can and put the spout on it and just left it flow quite quickly into and it worked. It seems to work quite good enough. Like, it obviously brought up the moisture content a bit, I suppose, but I put it at least a kind of reasonable size watering can on about a ton or 3/4 of a ton of grain. And I suppose I was in a hurry then to sow the grain that day, so I didn't do another batch. What I did was I brought up one big bag, we say, of inoculated grain, and another bag then was say not inoculated. But I brought up my watering can and some water with me. So as I put in the seed that wasn't inoculated, I used to just spray it over in the seeder. So, but the trouble with that was you want to be quite careful, because if you put in too much, you can affect the flow of the seed going into the going in. But that was only a possible problem I thought maybe with that. We sowed into a crop, into a field that had been was sown the previous fall, and we rotated it in a couple of weeks before that, week or 10 days before that, and we direct drilled it in then with our seeder, with our sower. And then I came back later on, and then I undersowed it then with chicory, clover and linseed. I didn't put any inoculant on those now, but I didn't really pay any attention to really. I noticed that the linseed grew very well in it, but I don't. That wasn't one we done. I don't know. And then that fall, then we direct drilled in winter beans into it, and it grew okay. But so basically that was my experience. I never really looked at it too much. Only going around with ag, I suppose, would be the best person to kind of give her observations then as to what happened then after, what the field looks like now. But okay. I've seen some mushrooms in it, which I hadn't seen before, which I think maybe they're poisonous mushrooms, I don't know, but at least it's a good sign enough to see something growing . But that's more or less it really, yeah.
And Richard, just on that, so we say the inoculated versus the uninoculated ground. You saw that you think the linseed did better.
Oh no, no, actually, John, no. I inoculated all of that field.
Right.
It just one was just inoculated in the bag down at the farm, and then the other one was just kind of seed was inoculated in the sower. I didn't do any trials as such. I was just busy just trying to get the job done. I was half-hearted about it, really,
Okay, and maybe is Aga, if you're there, was there anything that you would have noticed, but say from the point of view of the soil samples from Richard's fields that would have indicated the addition of an inoculant?
Well, the above ground observations were that you actually could see the mushrooms. You could see the fruiting mushrooms there. And there were some bare patches, generally not too bad. We noticed soil compaction, of course, but we also found worms, earthworms, and in some areas the soil structure at the first 10 centimeter wasn't too bad. So I'd say in terms of biology, you can't really tell much unless you bring the sample under microscope, so to say. But it was very unusual to see fruiting mushrooms in that type of field. So that's definitely a good thing.
And would it, if there was an opportunity to have a comparative analysis, we'll say with ground that wasn't treated, would that have helped, do you think, a little bit there?
Oh yeah, always having like a control or the opposite always helps. Yes. Even like a small patch, you don't need to have like the same size of field. You may have 2 by 2 or 3 by 3 meter patch that you use as your control.
Yes. Okay. And the mushrooms that you found, were they of a particular variety or type that indicate they're a better indicator of soil than, we'll say, other fungi?
Oh, I wouldn't be an expert. Well, I do go forage mushrooms in the forest. I wouldn't be an expert in those mushrooms. I wouldn't eat them personally, but I would say fruiting mushrooms in general, they are good to the soil because they need the rest of conditions to actually be there. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things we find in discussions and at different fora, but like one last night with a neighbor talked about a field, a rather wet field in front of his house that always had mushrooms at certain times of the year. And in recent years, he's found none. And of course, I said, well, the type of farming that you're involved in, which is chemical farming, has probably changed the balance between bacteria and fungi and maybe just made it poorer for fungi. So I think, that's a lot of discussion that we've had. And except I, then had a discussion with Jane Shackleton, who some of you know, and she talked about the huge volumes of mushrooms she's getting on her farm, which of course has been farmed for probably over 25 years, So, any other observations, Richard, or any other thoughts on the inoculation?
Not really. I suppose I haven't seen much mushrooms or anything like that in the other fields now that we have. That's one particular field that seemed to come across like that. But I just wonder, to say about ferns now, soil that would be under ferns. Maybe Morris might have some information on that. But is there any particular plants that we shouldn't go near, for our inoculation,
Yeah. I don't know, Aga, have you any feelings on that?
Exactly. You mean the differences between those fields?
He was talking about the fields there with ferns in it, and that. Was that it, Richard? That
Well, actually, no, they're not in. Luckily enough, they're not in the field. But actually, going around by the ditches, and maybe other fields now, there were farms,
Yeah, no, I didn't see that field. No.
Yeah, and I'd be nervous to take the soil from that. Though, that's all.
Yeah, I have a very anti-view of ferns. They have a chemical that they emit that stops the germination of certainly damages trees anyway. So I wouldn't view it as a positive, and it's carcinogenic as well.
Correct. Sorry, I'll just knock this off. What we see in the west of Ireland is huge infestations on the mountains and on a lot of land because, again, the lack of the trampling activities of cattle, where you have sheep only and overgrazing. So again, you know, and again, you of course again then lose your grass, because you know the light, no light will penetrate the, you know, those dense fern bunches, you know. So it's definitely, yeah, I'd agree with the last speaker, you know, and that there's other things that you certainly don't like around the farm. Maybe at this stage, just to get for a contrast, maybe we'll pass over to Morris. And Morris, would you just like, have you some slides there, Morris? Have you?
I do indeed.
And so maybe if we can share the screen.
Right, so I came into a lot of this biological farming via beer, basically, because I started to brew beer to try and get away from the commoditization of everything. And in that, I started going towards heritage grains to get more flavorful malt. And part of that is that one of the sort of attributes of heritage grains is that they're much taller straw, which is a negative in terms of harvesting, because it falls over and goes flat. But the positive is that it has a big root system. And that's kind of where I started to get going on seed inoculants to try and help the seeds to kick off and get into motion. Because my father would have been in tillage, so some of our ground has been in long-term tillage for as long as I've been alive, basically. So that would mean low soil carbon and low soil health, basically conventional agriculture. So we would have changed maybe whenever Guinness stopped buying malting barley in Ireland and importing cornstarch, but that's a separate discussion. But we changed to more crop rotation. It used to be there was 20 years of spring barley only and no cover crops. So that changed to crop rotation with winter and spring crops, winter barley, winter oats, spring barley. We did oilseed rape for a while. The old autumn storms weren't a positive for oilseed rape for us, and we're north Tipperary, so we're not that far from Galway, basically. But basically, lo and behold, I started kind of a journey in towards conservation agriculture, cover crops. Sorry, and the three pillars of conservation agriculture are your cover crops, your crop rotation, reduced tillage. And I thought, and this is sort of part of my plan, is that to brew tasty beer is to use I was thinking use heritage crops because they've got more flavor and taste. And they also, in my mind, would tie in with conservation agriculture of better soil health, bigger root systems feeding the soil, and that all coming together. So anyway, that's sort of where the photograph, if you look there is a heritage wheat,
wow.
which came up by accident, and it's up to my shoulder. So basically I was harvesting winter barley and I was like, you could see this thing shoulders above everything else. So bigger straw, if the same is mirrored under the ground, that's a huge root system, basically. So biological seed treatments, why? Basically, the idea is to try and kickstart the interaction between the seed and the soil. Because ultimately it is the soil that's feeding the plant. And it's not the roots finding nutrients. The roots are going via microbes to get the nutrients. You know, they're feeding the soil via your exudates, right? So there's a couple of different. This is just a little image of the rhizobia on some clover, which is in a cover crop, and there's a vetch there as well. But they're just a nice little visual of the microbes because they house the microbes, and that's for nitrogen fixation. So in terms of biological seed treatments, you've got your bacteria, right? So if you have legumes, you can inoculate clover with rhizobia. If your soil is good and healthy, the rhizobia should be in there in the soil already. But they say basically, like for beans, if you haven't had beans within 10 years, you may not have the nitrogen fixing rhizobia living in the soil. And the same, if anyone's done afforestation, if there has been trees in that field within the last 100 years, the microbes are there in the soil, your trees will afforest better than if there hasn't been trees in that field for the last 100 years. So this is kind of the idea of biological inoculation, is to try and help kickstart and put some of those microbes onto the seeds to help kickstart that interaction. So in grain, so rhizobia and for nitrogen fixing, you can also fix with bacillus and pseudomonas and other sort of beneficial microbes. You can also seed treatment. You could also basically apply food to the seed in terms of nutrients or in terms of molasses to feed the biology or your fish hydrolysate. And the other one is you can also apply a home, which is either biochar or peat and biostimulants. So those are kind of some of the things that you can inoculate your seeds with. In terms of home sourced seeds, home sourced inoculants, the most basic inoculant, and actually Richard was basically, that's another, that should be a fourth point, but there basically, go find healthy soil and rub that onto your seeds. That's basically a very healthy way of doing it. Another way, and particularly if you have grain, is you can do a seed soak. So you can soak seeds for 12 hours of good, healthy seeds that you were happy with the previous year. And they actually, the seeds also hold microbiology on, right, to help kickstart the next year's growth. So if you get a healthy bunch of seeds, soak those seeds, that water will actually contain microbes. You can then put those microbes onto the seeds that you want to inoculate and kickstart. Most people are organic, but basically you don't want to have that chemically treated because you will have nuked the seed before you ever try and apply biology to it. So that's a very simple one if you have grains. Compost teas, and this is where I'm not deep enough in to really talk about biocomplete compost, but this is one of my things of not using designer and microbes and starting to grow the microbiology to apply to the seeds on the farm. Is it good or bad? The idea of using a microscope to find out if it's good or bad really is a positive thing, because I don't want to be basically go to all this trouble of preparing the ground, adding the seeds, and then adding something that's negative to the seeds as opposed to positive, which wouldn't be great. And vermijuice would be a bit safer because the worms have done an awful lot of the digestion. Has good stuff coming out of worms basically, and made sure there isn't pathogens and stuff. So the other on the right hand side of the slide is on the road between Limerick and Tipperary, is some trees growing out of a rock face, which is, it's all about the exudates breaking down the rock and actually making the tree grow, which just a cool little moment. Okay, this is my little designer little way of getting some vermijuice. So I have adapted a barrel around the idea of a Johnson stew bioreactor. So I've been trying to do this sort of since last summer, basically, is when I started. And because I have a brewery, I have lots of barrels, so I thought I could make nice, pretty little things. So the idea is that you want aeration in a Johnson stew bioreactor. So they're saying put the pipes within a foot of, so that basically you don't have more than a foot between oxygen and air and the compost, basically. And at the end of the process, then add worms basically to kind of complete the process for 3 months. I think it's like 6 months for it to compost and then 3 months of worms. So basically I've been just adding all of the sort of kitchen scraps and stuff to try and get a nice mix and stuff. So I will probably improve by the time I'm finished the course. I'll be much better at it, but I thought I might as well start somewhere basically. So basically the other bit is to actually be able to collect the juice. So I've got a stainless steel pipe down through the middle, which I put holes in. And the idea is that I'll be able to pour some water at the top and collect it in a bucket at the bottom. And that'll give me a couple of liters of juice, which I can then add to seeds to put some of the microbes into, inoculate some of the seeds. So these are my trials from last spring. So this is spring barley, heritage spring barley, because that's the only seed I could get which wasn't seed treated with chemicals. These are designer microbes. So this is, and by why I mean designer is because it came from a company, an Irish company, so it's Irish microbes, but it is out of a white can, basically. So that it was Pseudomonas, Bacillus, and Rhizobia. Okay, so if you go to the top right, this is Brad Archer is the variety. So the right-hand side, unseed treated, there is nice rhizo sheets, which is, I don't know, is that to do with the heritage or not? But basically on the left, this was the stuff that was seed treated. And but to me, it's pretty obvious. There's bigger roots on the left. Nice. Now, there is a seed priming effect. So basically, if you do nothing other than just soak your seeds in water, you will get a more positive effect. So how much of this was just the seed priming of water versus the actual microbes, I don't know. But as a proper control next year, or this year, I should really soak the seeds in water for the control, just to make sure. Because basically you've just given the seeds a bit of a head start by giving them a bit of water, basically. So they'll be quicker to germinate. And we did notice that the stuff that was seed treated, I was actually driving back over it, rolling it, and it shouldn't have germinated for another 2 or 3 days, and it was up, and I was like, crap, basically. So it does help. There's a few days there of advantage. Bottom right, that's Hunter, that's a little bit older. And yeah, basically on the right, there's bigger, more clumps, basically, and more rhizosheaths. So that stuff is good. And on the left-hand side, that's a little bit later. And basically, sorry, on this side here, the left, I actually kept breaking the roots trying to get the rhizosheaths. So just much bigger, dangling. These are kind of subjective, but basically it did look better. The harvest, you couldn't really see any visual differences, but I did harvest basically a strip into a bag, put a different strip into a different bag. So I have kept the grains separate. There was maybe a 5% difference in yield, but like that's like, it depends how good and how straight I was cutting to make sure. I was trying to keep the cutter bar, the combine full, and keep the exact same width, but like that's marginal. But what I want to do is test that grain to actually test for micronutrients, sort of macronutrients, but also micronutrients. And then ultimately I might even brew same beer with the 2 different bags of grain, basically, because I mold on site, to see if there's a flavor difference. The other seed inoculation I did was with cover crops, and this was for the shift. We started direct drilling this year. And this was, we had mustard, which was 6 seed, which was 6 years old. It was pretty moldy, but basically Bacillus can help with germination with old seed. So basically, because we had it, we said, sure, look, we might as well mix it in. I did a mix with the mustard, mostly mustard, but in fodder radish, linseed, phacelia. So you got a nice little mix of different crops. And it germinated, which was great. Now, when we're talking about tillage versus non-tillage, this is the headland, which got a run of a disc, which gave an awful lot more volunteers, but it did help. The soil tillage gives your soil mineralization, which lets the crop get started a little bit earlier. I also, with the Bacillus, I put a bit of N16, which is nitrogen and magnesium is good for root development. But basically, this is the field. So on the left is seed treated, on the right isn't treated. So this was about, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks afterwards. And basically you could see you did have a decent little bit of a lift between the treated and the non-treated, 2 different photographs. It's a little bit patchy in parts, but basically, yeah, that was a positive. You could see a difference in the seed treatment, which was useful. And now whether that was because it was old seed, whether it's because of the N16, I don't know, but basically it was better germination. So we'll take it, basically. This is what the field ultimately looked like, which was lots of flowers, which was one of your pillars of conservation agriculture, keeping your soil nicely covered. So ultimately the whole soil was covered. But I think that advantage, the quicker you get a cover crop sown, the more cover you get. That little bit of advantage might help a few days. So it's not going to revolutionize everything, but it will give a nice help, basically. We're basically chatting about this. The difference between the plow, min-till, and direct drill. Basically, plowing is anarchy for the soil, in terms of soil disturbance, right? In terms of worms, it's not good. Now, the problem with less soil disturbance is you've less soil mineralization. And my idea is that if you're doing less mineralization, you don't give the crop basically as quick a start in life. Can you help it with seed treatment? And that's my idea of basically the N16 and the biology, is to try and give it a help. And this is, in my context, we're coming from low soil carbon and low soil health, basically. And we are conventional, we do use fungicides. So basically, how can we shift that transition from conventional towards more conservation? And that's, can you help basically to not lose your shirt and not have failed crops that don't do anything? And ultimately, because if you fail badly, I know we'll end up back at the plow, which is where I don't want to be, basically.
Yeah.
So this is min-tilled winter oats, which is growing at the moment, basically. So I had a control, no seed treatment. I then went a little bit more mad, basically, because as I was mixing it up, I have bacillus and seaweed. So seaweed is a biostimulant. Bacillus is also basically for crop health. Humic acid and N16. Humic acid is basically, it's also a stimulant, but it's also what you find in compost. You'll have an awful lot more humates in compost. So it's kind of a product form of compost. So it's a cheating way of kind of getting there. But it's quite easy to apply. And then basically I went with the whole the kitchen sink, which was the vermijuice, which wasn't very mature, bacillus, seaweed, humic, N16, and basically everything positive I could possibly think. And it's basically it's sowing and it's growing. And I did some, do I have it? I've done some, yeah, we'll notice harvest basically when it's over the weighbridge, what happens. It might be hard to test, but it looks good so far. And what I'm going to do is basically do SAP analysis, and hopefully if my grain analysis works this year, I'm going to do grain analysis again on the oats, because I know what sections of the field are actually done. And so in terms of the Talamh Bio experiments, this is, Aga might remember this field, didn't look as pretty the day we were out when it was lashing rain and all the cover crops have actually been eaten. But this was the cover crop, which was fodder kale and leafy turnip with some clover and vetch. And basically what I'm hoping to do would be to do sort of a little bit of a trial on seed treatments. And in terms of seed treatments, I'm actually we'd have to put a control, but I'm sort of thinking of the microbes in terms of vermijuice. In terms of food, I'm thinking of fish hydrolysate. In terms of biostimulants, a bit of seaweed. In terms of a home for all of these microbes, so basically that would be biochar. Because, well, one of the positives of biochar is positive for soil health, basically long term, in terms of cation exchange and water retention and water drainage and stuff like that. But you need to prime it, and that's the idea of applying the food. Which would be the fish hydrolysate and probably a little bit of molasses, and also the microbes. And that would also, problem about seed treating is that you treat seed, you need to kind of use it fairly fresh. By applying something like biochar, you have a little bit of a home for the microbes on the seed. So hopefully you could seed treat it maybe a week before you actually sow it. Because just when you're sowing, you're busy trying to jump down and actually do your seed treatment, get back sowing. It's extra time. It's fine if you have that little window, but if you had a little bit more time, it would be a positive. SAP analysis, that's what I'm hoping to try and see the difference between, say, this is a field of winter barley that we have. So on the right is humic acid and N16. On the left there is heritage crops, which is nice and taller. You can see it taller already than the modern winter barley. And on the left then is the bacillus and seaweed treatment. So the field is nicely divided. So if I can do the SAP analysis as we go along, we can actually see, is there a difference? And I've done one set of SAP analysis, and the nutrients levels do look a little bit different between the two and the control. So that's kind of cool, basically, if you're actually getting a healthier plant. So yeah, there we go. There's the conclusions. Keep testing, have a control, and maybe not make the farm look like a complete lab experiment, and do some work at the same time.
Yeah, very good. Well done, Maurice. Thanks very much for that. That's a lovely presentation. Just a couple of things come to mind. Could you maybe explain SAP analysis, number one? And number two, looking at the photograph, is that Lough Derg you're looking out on across into Galway?
It is indeed, yeah. We're at the top of Lough Derg, northwest Tipperary.
Okay.
SAP analysis is basically, it's where you take leaves basically when the plant is growing. So at this stage and all the way up until flag leaf in terms of crops. You can do it in grassland as well. and you send it off. I send it off to a lab in the Netherlands, basically to test all your major minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, all the way down to the other one, calcium, magnesium, boron, zinc, copper, iron, all of these guys. And basically all our crops are actually low on boron. Don't know if it's the time of year that we're actually testing, but my suggestion is that I'm going to be going out with some boron to try and help basically keep the plants. Boron is the steering wheel, basically, I'm being told.
And in terms of the results you're getting vis-a-vis a soil sample versus a herbage sample, which one do you think is the most accurate? You know,
none of them are accurate, John. It depends. It's all about trends, right? So I'm actually, I probably haven't done long enough in terms of years to be at this, but the soil is just what's in the soil. The sap is meant to be a little bit more accurate because that is what's actually in the plant. And it depends on the time of day. So you have to sample before 9 o'clock in the morning, basically. But actually, the soil sample that came back from AGA, which is actually a field neighboring this field, there is boron, there's reasonable levels of boron in the soil, but why is it not in the crop? Is something not right, basically? Do you know what I mean? So if you have the two, you can say it's in my soil, but it's not getting into my crop. Why is it not? Is there something not right? And do you know what I mean? As in, if the soil was low and the plant is low in boron, then I'm like, right, well, we just need to apply. So I don't know if it's that the plant isn't functioning to get the boron, or is it actually low? And
so maybe just
I'd say that would be down to the soil biology at this stage, as we know that those microbes deliver those nutrients to the plant. So there may be a lacking microbe in the soil that is not giving the boron to the plants. Do you think?
Yeah, soil biology is always the answer, basically. What I was weird though was that it was also in the grassland. So I should really have sampled. We have a field that we don't cut silage on and doesn't get it. It's a stony field, so it doesn't get fertilizer unless like there's anything left in the back at the back of the hopper, basically, and you're driving back to the farm, to the yard. But it'd be interesting to test that and see, is that also low in boron? So I don't know. I haven't investigated it much yet, to be honest.
Okay, and yeah, no, that's interesting. Anyone else have observations on that low boron levels, or maybe what might be, or anybody that has done any work in that area?
From talking to David Wallace, who's involved in the Denanu project and doing sampling around the country, they reckon the lack of boron is a big thing around Ireland.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. The presentation.
I second Thomas. Sorry. Yeah, boron is lacking.
Is that, for instance, rather than a lockup, could we put it down to something like, for instance, is boron, I guess, something that would leach from soils as well?
Oh, I haven't come across a publication on that, but I don't think it actually is absorbed by soil, by soil. So I'd say it is potential. It could potentially leach from the soil. Yes.
I had a question about that because we have a boron deficiency as well, and we've noticed in beetroot in particular in our production. And I was wondering, and maybe this is something you guys know the answer to, but I've thought about, is there a way you could apply the boron to like my winter green manure crop so that like it picks up the boron and then that gets kind of put in when I go to grow my veg in it the following season? I've kind of preloaded the boron by spraying the green manures. Has anybody any idea if that would work?
Fergal, that's what they say is ideal, really, is to apply your micronutrients that you're missing to your cover crop, so that and let the cover crop process it to then have it in the soil nicely available for your next crop.
Gotcha.
Now I'm too late for this crop anyway, but the other thing is we'll try and do it foliar, basically. Now, boron is toxic, so make sure you don't do it 4 times higher than you should be, because then you can kill the plant, basically.
Yeah,
so that's why people are cautious of boron, but gently, little bit of boron, I think, is probably what
I have applied it to. I've applied it to beetroot, like on occasion, just to kind of. But I mean, I think it probably too late, like really, because once it starts displaying the signs,
then you're
and
And conceptually, that's the idea of seed treatment, actually, sorry, which I never actually said, was that you're trying to kickstart things before you've got a symptom and try and deal with the symptom. Is you're trying to put a little bit of nutrients and a little goes a long way, basically.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. And is there an optimum time to apply those like micronutrients to a cover crop? I mean, is it like when it's in the growth stage? Probably, like I suppose when it kicks on. I mean, when is it? That's.
I would deal with practicalities there. You want the cover crop with enough leaf area to kind of absorb
Yeah.
it, and you want good soil and air temperatures. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So there's probably
Yeah.
a window there that
Yeah.
is right. Do you know what I mean?
I think, was it you that shared the image of you terminating a cover crop with just a disc harrow as well? Was that you? Was it?
That was me, yeah.
I don't know how you managed to do. I mean, obviously we're much smaller scale, but I've never had any success. I mean, we've got a very small disc harrow because I'm doing everything like it's only a meter wide. It's like it's tiny. You'll see this micro if you come to the farm. It's like a micro tillage tool, but like it would never work. I don't think it would work anyway.
It's a big yeah, that's a big topic of conversation. And
Yeah.
like when you look at conservation agriculture in America, they're like crimp rolling it and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
because they've savage growth that you can get the crops mature enough that you could then crimp it and fire away. That's a big 3 meter heavy disc. It's doing
Yeah.
more tillage than I'd actually like,
right.
but that was a cover crop of mustard. Went to seed. I was actually sneakily thinking of actually combining it to get seed, but combining in the middle of December would probably be just
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of sacrilege. But all that seed, the birds ate all the seed. A
Yeah, sure.
load of it is on the ground, so I kind of need to germinate the mustard seed
Yeah.
to not have issues in my next crop. So that's where the disc was. So ideally, I think that was so mature it'll actually chop it and do a good job. And
It's probably brittle nearly at that stage. The mustard gets brittle. Like kind of gets.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, as in that, and this is the whole the sacrilegious debate of, is it better to give a light disc? Is it better to give a quick little spray of Roundup and deal with it all and let it rot down?
Don't mention that. Don't mention
You
that.
might-
Here.
You might have
Well,
mentioned it, but
yes,
you might that could have been a blaspheme there, Morris. But anyway.
Yeah.
But,
Morris has
no.
left the call.
I nearly tripped over as we walked down the field when I heard that glyphosate thing.
But I no, I mean, I think here there's in fairness here, Morris is moving. I think we have two branches of agriculture. We have us old guys maybe in the organic area that as well we need to have a much stronger understanding of biological systems, and then we have people coming from the conventional side, and there's an area in the middle I think that we'll all eventually inhabit. So I think it's all good. Just on with
Fergal,
regard to
Oh, sorry.
sorry, go ahead, Aga.
Sorry, no, it's just me. No, Fergal, Jim Cronin did a walk where he was talking, so he'd be more on your scale, sort of with vegetables. And he did, for his cover crops, he rolled them with like a concrete roller. He rolled them twice so that
Okay.
the sap, again, similar, after he sprayed them with or after he treated them with whatever nutrients he wanted, he rolled them twice with a concrete roller to sort of, so that the sap, so they're actually alive, and then it was going back into the soil, and then he just mulched them, and he said he had pretty good success with that.
Yeah, okay. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
so the other way of terminating, so some guys would, in the minimum tillage world, would be to disc it lightly, but disc it once, leave it a few days, and disc it at a different angle to try and, because you discing, you won't kill everything in one
Yeah.
go because you've got a little bit of space between them. But if you go like at 30 degrees, you might be able to get a more breakage of it. Rolling is, well, the best is crimper rolling, and the best is a good frosty night, -3 or 4, and then you get up in the middle of the night and you go out with your roller and you roll it and you burst open the things. Now, I haven't even mentioned that to my wife, that, oh, honey, I'm going to like go out in the middle of the night and go rolling. But that is, we just don't get enough heavy frosts really to do it, you know, is the...
No, I mean, I use a flail mower, to be honest, is what I would use. Like, I flail the whole lot, because it's a small, like I say, it's all on the meter bed, but like, I mean, and I'm trying to find the point, if I can find the point where, I mean, it is after the sap is coming up into the rye, like cereal rye, I'm hoping that I might this year try and plant straight through it. That's what I'm thinking, like, but we'll see how that goes. That's like
this is my biggest, in terms of converting towards minimum tillage and direct drilling, is winter crops are much easier. Spring crops are much harder, basically, because that
Mm.
mineralization, soil disturbance is great to get the crop up and going.
Mhm.
And the problem with the cover crop is if that's decaying when your crop is trying to go, it's going to suck up nitrogen,
Yeah.
basically. Because if it's too high in the carbon nitrogen ratio, which is where I want more legumes probably in my cover crops so as it'll decay quicker. And that's where they're like, well, do you break it down 6 weeks before you plant, or do you break it down 3 weeks before to try and get some of that decaying started so that it's not sucking nitrogen when your crop is growing?
And Lawrence, did you say you grazed some of them?
Yeah, so on the home farm we would graze off the cover crops. So then you don't really have as much of an issue on that because it's grazed. And
And-
it's animal poo, which is better basically.
Yeah,
The golden
and
hoof.
And amazingly, this just have one farmer in Galway, west of you there, a good bit, Morris, and he's been doing some tillage, but he's done a lot of work with cover crops. He's doing quite a bit of he's been on lots of knots courses, but incredibly, he finished lambs and hoggets. He's finishing at the moment on cover crops, and it's incredible the weights he's getting with nothing else. I think he himself is quite gobsmacked. And he still feels the cover crop will still do a lot of its work in terms of fixing nitrogen, etc. But he will also, as well, he has this extra thing where he was running the sheep through stubbles, and then he moved them onto the cover crops, and just couldn't believe the farmer that he was in a kind of a grazing agreement with, Kim, and he didn't recognize his own lambs. So,
Yeah. Like we got 2 grazings, and you can get 3 grazings out of a cover crop.
Yeah.
Now, what was interesting actually when I was walking around with Aga is that lovely, all the vetch and clover gone. There was only, I don't know if it's leafy turnip or the other one. Basically, the lambs didn't touch it. And I was like, right, well, that's obviously less palatable than the other 3 that were in it. But like, you couldn't see clover. You could, like, I was like, oh, there's a clover. I eventually found one. But just one of the crops, it did not touch, which was mad. Like,
yeah, leafy turnip. This isn't the first time I've seen that. And where even, for instance, stubble turnip of various varieties not doing the job in many cases. I don't know why, but just not doing the job. Can I ask you very quickly about the fish hydrosalate? Hydroslate. Sorry, what
I
is
don't know if I've actually spelled that right there.
Fish hydroslate. I just wondered what that was.
Fish guts, basically. Fish guts grind down into a small thing. Now it's a serious nitrogen source. That's the thing. Like, you can, it's expensive basically, but it is, I don't know, I haven't used it yet. I don't know if it's actually too toxic to really put onto seed as a seed coating, but I do know people have used it. The idea is, when we're direct drilling, I would like to actually start adding biology into the ground so that we actually place the seed, but then actually have a liquid pump behind it's a tine disc behind that. So we're feeding a little bit of molasses and fish guts basically in behind the seed. Very small quantities, and maybe by then it would be a little bit distance from the seed. It wouldn't be right on the seed. But that is sort of the idea. The idea is to kind of get small quantities of stuff that could have a large effect, basically.
Aga, do you want to comment on that fish product?
I know from the lectures that Dr. Inam, she advises to use fish hydrolysate in composting.
Okay.
Other than that, not really much of use that I am aware of. No. If it's toxic, if it's not for human consumption, I'd say it's not gonna make much of a harm on the field. So
my understanding of it is basically fish hydrolysate is amino acids, and basically in conventional ag we are adding nitrogen or nitrate, which basically eventually ends up into the plant. But the amino acids are much more usable, so a lot less nitrogen basically has a much greater effect on the plant, and that's why you can burn a plant with fish guts basically, is because it's so potent. Basically, you could overpower the plant. why I like it then is that you could add very little of it and have a large effect.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd say she advises to use that fish hydrolysate as a high nitrogen source or material for your composting recipe.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Oh.
then it would degrade, like over time it would spread out in your compost, you know, it, and
Mm.
you shouldn't have any burn trouble basically.
And just finally then, can I just ask the question, Morris, in terms of we're starting at the soil, going up to the plant, going into the final product. I mean, in the work that you're doing and then testing your final product, are you starting to see any kind of minor changes in maybe the constituents of the beer, of whether it's flavor or whether it's the presence of, when you do your chemical analysis? Can you detect changes?
That's the very difficult test now, John, drinking the beer, you know.
I can help you, but
I tell you, the biggest thing was you can smell the difference and and in the malt basically. And I think you can taste the difference then into the beer. I haven't done chemical analysis of the beer. That's something I want to do. And I haven't done the chemical analysis of the grain. But basically, I did notice, 2000 and when was the big drought? 2 years ago.
Yeah.
2 years ago.
2 years.
Basically, we had massive regrowth in our spring barley. So all our spring barley failed in terms of, we then got fusarium basically, which you
Okay.
can't mold grain with fusarium because it creates gushing and it's a toxin basically. But our heritage crops didn't have fusarium, which is kind of cool. And I put that down to rhizophagy, which is down to a bigger and a more healthy root system basically. Which is very cool. And that's kind of what's encouraged me into more of the biological and more of the seed treatments, kind of help that root to make sure we don't get fusarium, because then we can't mold basically.
Okay. Interesting. Comments from other people there and other people.
I think Jer has his hand up.
Buckley, yeah. Good stuff.
Did you add rhizobia to the seed? I remember her saying in the course that we should look for the little nodules on the clover, and they're nice red ones, to cut them and to disperse it on the seed. But I was just wondering how to do that at scale, like.
You can buy them in a white can if you want, basically, Jer.
Where would you buy them? Or is it,
I haven't done it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it a little bit on the multi-species. Actually, inoculate the clover just in case, to see if it. I didn't have great take of the clover in. I was overseeding without spraying off the old sward, and I don't know. It'll only be the end of next year that I really see that the clover survive. But I do wonder, would a bit of inoculating help? So those are the little nodules down there, and I did cut them over, but you could see a little bit of pink. Problem is, that's clover in January when the soil is cold. So like really you'd want to harvest the microbes, when clover is in action with the nice warmer soil temperatures. But there was a bit of pink. But again, boron apparently is a huge, is it boron? There's a couple of minerals that are huge in terms of rhizobia and nitrogen fixing in clover. So I'm suspicious did I have a little imbalance in the soil or lack of boron, so therefore I didn't actually get that nitrogen fixing out of the clover. So that's a different, but yeah, basically you can seed inoculate. And what Richard was basically talking about is, if you took that soil around the base of a clover that's doing nicely, you could rub that onto your other seed and that would work perfectly as well. That's how you cut out the middleman of buying a white can of rhizobia to seed inoculate.
Somebody saying the other night about adding oats to the mixed species. And I was talking to Tom McGuinness a while ago, and he was you were saying that, were you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I asked Tom McGuinness about it, and he said he'd highly recommend it, even to graze it after 2 months. He said it's worth doing. It's fantastic for the soil. Did you find that?
I haven't really done it yet, actually, but I think I will be doing it when I oversow. I think I will chuck a little bit of, because I actually had a bit of cover crop seed left in the drill when I went over sowing some grass, and I was like, well, sure, it's only leafy turnip and kale. Yeah. But sure, it's stuck in and grown quite well. So I think I will actually start doing a little bit of that.
Okay. Just pick up there a point of clarification. Tom McGuinness, seeddirect.ie. Tom is up in Meath. Good fella, generally good advice, a lot of experience and knowledge across both conventional and organics. Thomas, you wanted to come in there as well, did you?
I did, just around the biochar. Is the
Yes.
biochar applied to the ground, or are you putting coating directly on the seeds?
So what I want to do is actually coat the seeds with the biochar. Now, I haven't done it yet. We're going to have to figure out how small to grind the biochar. But the idea is to try and help when you're mixing the stuff onto the seed, right? You're trying to spread it on all the seeds. So I was adding about 5 liters of stuff to 500 kilos of seed, right? And I was actually putting my process was that I was putting it through an old seed cleaner. And as it was falling out, I was basically I had 2 little garden sprayers and I was spraying it around, and then I'd actually mix it around with my hands, and it's pretty manual. So this year I'm hoping to, now we're trying to do it at scale. So I'm trying to use an auger, but my idea is that if the biochar is a home, so if some of that watery kind of stuff actually soaks into the biochar, that watery stuff should actually have most of the microbes. Now, the problem with biochar is that it's hungry for nitrogen and nutrients. So that's where I'm like, well, if I put the nutrients and the biology that soak into the biochar, and if I have some molasses that sticks it to the seed, that I can make a nice little mixture there that can stick on, and it should hopefully keep for a little bit longer than, I don't want to seed treat and then have the bag of seed heating up, and then I destroy a whole bag of seed. That wouldn't be good fun. So that's sort of now, and we're only talking, I've been trying to figure out rates. I think you're only talking about a couple of kilos, like probably only about 2 kilos of biochar with that 5 kilos of liquid onto that 500 kilos of seed. So like it's tiny rates really in the grand scheme of things. But sure, if I'm doing 100 acres, I'd be happier to spread a small amount of biochar over everything than just doing 2 meters at a high rate. Do you know what I mean? So that's sort of my thought process, particularly if I'm getting the bang for a buck out of the biostimulant effect of the grains germinating and getting that 2 or 3 days head start on the other guys. That's sort of the thought process there. And also, if the biochar is in the seed zone, I think that's better, because you want to help the seeds of the grain crop. You don't want to help the weed seeds or the other fellas, basically.
Exactly, yeah.
That's my thinking on it. I haven't done it yet, so I'm.
What's your experience, Thomas?
Well, I've been looking at it for a good while, coating them for the vegetable seeds and lettuce seeds and stuff like that, and again, pre-colonizing it. I wouldn't be doing 500 kilos of any seed, like I'd probably be doing 500 grams, so it's probably more practical on the scale. But I think the biochar has good all potential for producing on the farm, but then also for the carbon content of the seeds afterwards. So having the biochar around it, I think helps the seed as it goes into the plant use carbon better.
Yeah.
There's definitely a good bit of research to be done there.
Yeah, I'd be concerned about like when we were walking around with Aga, it was very mucky on top. Now Aga would complain about the years of conventional agriculture is probably at fault, but it is sheep walking on a surface like that, and this time of year, it does make it mucky, and you will get compaction. Now, we have a tine drill, so my hope is that the tine drill will break through that compaction. Before we were ploughing, so we would decimate any compaction there. But I have heard it with the finishing lambs, that if you're finishing lambs on them, they'll go backwards if you go back to grass. You know, if you're on the red start or something, if you have them putting on huge gains and then you put them back onto grass. you
Yeah,
go backwards.
absolutely. You can't do that. You actually have to finish them directly off the cover crop.
Yeah.
That's the secret. So really, it's I think we can close down proceedings for this evening. Again, thanks to everybody who took part. Thanks to Aga there for the technical advice. It's great thanks to Richard and to Morris for the presentations, and again for all who contributed. So I just want to wish you all